Hi everyone, and welcome to video number 4 on GCSE, the American West. Well, so far in the first few videos we've concentrated more on the Plains Indians. Now we need to start examining the other side of the situation, ladies and gentlemen, the settlers who wanted to either cross or settle onto the Plains Indians' land. And we'll start with the United States government and their policy towards the Plains Indians. Now, here's the problem. Most white settlers admitted that the Plains Indians had some claim to the land because they'd lived there for years, in some cases centuries. But the settlers thought that the Plains Indians were not making the most of the land. For the settlers, that meant farming or taking the minerals from the land, clearing the forests, etc. But remember the Plains Indians' traditional way of life, moving around, following the buffalo. They did not do that. So the settlers began to argue, look, either the Plains Indians start to use the land properly, i.e. the way that the white settlers would use it, or the settlers would move on and force the Plains Indians to move off so that the white settlers could take the land. That was the tricky situation. Now, the United States government did want people to develop all the way across America, move across America, because it would be better for the country economically. So they wanted people to move west. But at the same time, they wanted to avoid any potential conflict or fighting between the Plains Indians and this new group, the settlers. So the United States government came up with two possible answers, two possible strategies. Number one, keep the settlers and the Plains Indians apart so that they will never meet and they'll never come into conflict. Their second strategy was to encourage the Plains Indians to change and become more like the white settlers, using the land in a different way. But this is the problem. Dun 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 da 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 da. Mission impossible. Yes, that's what they wanted, but it was an impossibility to achieve both of these things. For example, if they achieved aim number one, keeping the settlers and the Plains Indians apart, well then the Plains Indians would never change their way of life. They would carry on living as the Plains Indians, which was the second aim. So the government had got itself in a bit of a fix. They could not keep the two groups apart and yet still somehow merge them to change the Plains Indians' way of life. So what actually happened? Well, from this part of the course, about 1830 to 1851, there were 4 key events. And that's what we'll have a look at now for the rest of the video. Event number 1, the Indian Removal Act, 1830, signed by the President Andrew Jackson. Let's have a little look at the map. Here's a map of America, roughly about 1834. Here's the United States of America. Here's where the Plains Indians were, known here as the Indian Territory. Look over here, we have Mexico, a huge country. Over here, Oregon, the Territory of Oregon, which America shared with Britain, and a few other minor territories as well. Florida down here, Miami, Florida, etc. So here, the green bit here, this is the United States of America, 1830s, 1834. So the Indian Removal Act, 1830, basically the Americans are forcing the tribes of Indians who live down here and forcing them onto the Indian territory. Almost 50,000, about 46,000 of the Indian tribes from these eastern states of America were forced onto the Indian territory. It was known as the Trail of Tears. Some of the tribes, the Cherokee, the Creeks, the Cherokee in particular, they suffered terribly on this journey. Thousands died from illness, starvation, but they were forced so that the settlers could take this land and make it fully the USA. To encourage the Indians to move, the Plains Indians, onto the Indian territory here, these people from the east, the American government said, look, President Jackson says this, if you move, we will protect you from the tribes that are already there, and we will protect you from any white settlers, and we guarantee, I promise you, you will never have to move again. That's how he persuaded them to move. And as you can see here, this thick black line, okay, that was the permanent Indian frontier. Notice the use of the word permanent. It says, if we put this frontier in, then you will be protected. Thank you for moving. We've asked you to move. We will now protect you. So that was the first key event, the Indian Removal Act. A few years later, 1834, a second US government act, the Trade and Intercourse Act, which basically said, we will set up this permanent Indian frontier. Check the year, sorry, ladies and gentlemen. 1834. Put that in your head. Permanent. 1834. This will keep the settlers away. No settler, by the law of the American government, signed by the president, no settlers were allowed to go onto the Indian territory. You couldn't go on and sell guns. You couldn't go on and sell alcohol. This border or frontier was protected. They built army forts. The soldiers protected it, linked by military road for better communications. So that's what's happened. The Americans have taken this land. They've put the Indians on there, the eastern tribes, onto the Indian territory, and they said, we will protect you permanently. There's the first two key events. Now, at first, things worked well. Settlers got this eastern land here, and they didn't want this because they said, oh, it's like the Great American Desert. That's what they called it. The Indian Territory. It's terrible land. We don't want that. We're happy with what we've got. So at first, things worked well. But there's nearly always a but in history, ladies and gentlemen. In the words of the late, great David Bowie, there began to be many changes. Things began to change. As we moved into the 1840s, certain events happened which changed the map of America. It went from that to this. Now, can we see what's happened? Well, first of all, we have Oregon. As you see here, at first, Oregon was shared with Britain. But 1846, America gets total control of Oregon. It's no longer shared. That's one change. So America has now got this on its own, right away across the other side of the country, separated by the Indian Territory. Another huge change. Look what has happened, ladies and gentlemen, to Mexico. Here we are in the 1830s. Here's Mexico in the 1840s. Late 1840s, 1848. What has happened to Mexico? Well, quite simply, America has won a war against Mexico. And can you see what has happened to America now? It has spread far more across to the west. Here, Mexico had what is now California. But it's no longer. Can we see what has happened? California is now called unorganized land, but it's been taken from Mexico. Mexico's just this tiny little bit down there. So now America has got all of this. It's got this new land, and it's got the potential to take this land here. Well, what's slap bang in the middle of America now, ladies and gentlemen? The Indian Territory. Here it wasn't. It was on the edge, look. There was nothing over here, because that's Indian Territory and that's Mexico. That's why they put the border or the frontier there. But things have changed. There have been huge changes. Can we see that? Previously, that was an obvious border, but not now. USA is spreading westward. Remember what I said earlier in the video? The American government encouraged, they wanted people to spread for economic reasons, to make the country richer. So now the only way to get to the west was a long sea journey, which took months. Well, that wasn't good enough. A slow, long, tough, difficult journey? No. People wanted to go across the land. That made more sense. But remember, 1834, oh, that's a permanent border. We will not let anyone onto your land. That's what they said to the Plains Indians. The government changes its mind. The situation has changed. So the government says, actually, we will allow people to cross the land. That permanent frontier lasted less than 20 years. That's not permanent. It's short. It's temporary. Well, how would the Plains Indians feel about that, ladies and gentlemen? What do you think? Of course, they're not going to be very pleased. They'll think that the promises have been broken. They're upset. They start to attack some of the settlers, the travellers. So then the US Army has to go on to protect them. Because the settlers are using trails, I'll talk more about that in a later video, to get across here, either to Oregon or down into what became California. So we see that the idea of keeping the two sides apart is not actually happening. Settlers could now cross, by law, they're allowed to cross the Indian frontier now. The permanent frontier was not permanent. So that's the third change, the key events, the war with Mexico, a key defining feature of the change of landscape in America. And the fourth one, 1851, the Indian Appropriations Act. Well, what's this all about? Well, we've just seen now some settlers want to cross the Indian Territory. Now some settlers want to actually settle on the Indian Territory. What's the government answer? Well, yet again, they offer a solution, a promise. They'll say, right, I know people are coming across here now. Sorry about that. I know we said that we wouldn't do that, but we've done it. So what we're going to offer to you now, Plains Indians, is we will put you in certain parts of this territory. We will reserve it for you. So they will be called reservations, smaller bits of land where only you will go, and the settlers will leave you alone. That's what this new law, this Indian Appropriations Act, was all about. So they said, we will set aside reserved land for you, managed by us, the American government. Some of the land, some of the reservations still had the buffalo, so they could still hunt in their traditional way. But there was also an attempt to change the traditional way of life of the Plains Indians and say, look, we'll give the land to the settlers. You can have this land. We'll reduce it, but we'll reserve it for you. And we will then encourage you to change your way of life. Start farming. Set up schools aimed to civilize, i.e. make the Plains Indians live like the white settlers lived. Make them more like the white Americans. So that's what they did. They tried to change the lifestyle. Remember I said they set up schools to try and educate and make them more like the white people. Leads to that very old joke, ladies and gentlemen. A very amusing joke. Sorry about that. Terrible play on words. Okay? Some of the settlers, some of the United States government people, tried to show the Plains Indians, for example, how to milk cows so that they could farm. Well, what would the Plains Indians say to that? Well, they would say it was utter nonsense. Sorry about that. That's a dreadful joke, and I apologise. It's a serious point, though, because the Plains Indians were not very happy at being told to change their traditional way of life. So we've seen quite clearly the USA is spreading out. The Plains Indians have been given smaller and smaller pieces of land. The permanent frontier was not permanent. Oh, change your way of life. Be more like us. So this is what's happened. This was government policy in this key time period of the course, 1830 to 1850. These are the changes. Would it work? Well, time will tell. The government policy. They don't want conflict, but have they done enough to stop conflict? We'll have to find that out in later videos. So in this video, I've talked about the settlers beginning to move west and the impact on the Plains Indians. The settlers beginning to either move across the Indian territory or actually start to settle on the Indian territory as they move or migrate west. But the key reason, the key question which we've got to ask is why? Why did these white settlers decide to move? What were their reasons, ladies and gentlemen? And the answer to that will be in the next video. As ever, I hope it's been useful. All the best now.